Mark chapter 14, verses 32 to 36. They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter and James and John along with him, and he began to pray, deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little further, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." John chapter 18, verses 1 to 5, followed by verses 10 to 11. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side, there was an olive grove, and he and his disciples went into it. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place, because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the grove, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing that what was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servant, cutting off his right ear. The servant's name was Malchus. Jesus commanded Peter, "Put your sword away. Shall I not drink the cup the Father has given me?"
So gardens, they can be wonderful places of relaxation, of comfort, places of beauty and contentment. But for us, and for many, with unruly gardens, they can be places of great distress and anguish, with an overwhelming feeling of wanting to run away. There are several gardens referred to in the Bible, the first being the Garden of Eden, the ultimate garden of beauty and contentment and peace with God, that was broken by sin, and Adam and Eve were banished. And here we find ourselves with Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, whereas he is here to right that wrong. The gardens referred to in the Bible are places that are bittersweet. So the Garden of Gethsemane for Jesus is a place that he has come to pray. It is mentioned several times, a place of solace for him. But in these verses, we hear the anguish and the overwhelming feeling of sadness for Jesus. The Garden of Gethsemane is a garden that Jesus knows. He's not come here to hide. It's a place that he has been before. He's come for answers and he's come for peace. It's not a coincidence that the Garden of Gethsemane is an olive garden where the produce is crushed for its goodness. Jesus speaks the words, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death." Such heartfelt, vulnerable words for Jesus. He's wrestling internally with God about what he knows he has to do but would rather not do. However, it's important to recognise that Jesus is not anguished and downcast and sorrowful about death. He does not fear death. He is anguished and sorrowful to the point of death about the cup, which in the Bible represents God's wrath. Jeremiah 25, verse 15. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, said to me. Take from my hand this cup filled with the wine of my wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. The wrath is all of God's anger and judgment on sin, which will be poured out on his Son. And Jesus, in this prayer and in these moments of vulnerability with his Father, is crying out to ask if there's any other way, if he can take away the cup from him. God doesn't take the cup from Jesus, but he does strengthen Jesus to be able to take and drink the cup. The same is true for us in our sufferings. We can cry out to God. The Psalms are full of laments of people who are suffering, of people crying out to God to take away what they are enduring. And sometimes God will, and sometimes God won't. But he will always be with us in our suffering, just as he was with Jesus. Ironside says, his holy soul shrank from the awfulness of being made sin upon the tree. It was not death, but the divine anger against sin, the imputation to him of all our iniquities, that filled his soul with horror. There was no conflict of wills. Jesus cries out to God, saying, Abba, Father, which is the name for Daddy. He is to be separated from his Father, and he is to take the cup that should be ours, but he is taking our place. The following verses that we read, Judas arrives with an army. Now that army was potentially up to maybe 600 soldiers, but Jesus was not going to run away. Jesus was not in hiding. At that moment, at that point when Judas arrives, Jesus has already won the struggle of the cross. He has already accepted in his mind that there is no other way, and he is ready and willing to die for us. At this point, we see his majesty. When they ask where Jesus is, and he says, I am, the guards, they all fall down. Jesus is wholly human, but he's also divine, and it's something that is very difficult for us to get our heads around or understand. But in this moment, his majesty shines through. He has been vulnerable, and now he is the presence of God in that moment. How wonderful to have a God that understands our humanity in all of its awfulness and struggles and sin, and yet to have a son willing to die for us, willing to take on the wrath of his Father, and loving us to the point of death. Tomorrow we will hear about another garden, the Garden of Golgotha, which is the tomb in which Jesus was laid when he died. So Eden, we lost our connection to God in that garden. In Gethsemane, God we found in our suffering. In Golgotha, there's hope because there's resurrection. But ultimately, we can look forward to a heavenly garden, the ultimate victory when we are fully restored at one and together with our Father.